Now we're going to the next part, to the presentation, to the fireside chat. So this is, next slide, this is about Lacuna.ai. I had the pleasure to get to know Wen Xu, who's going to actually give us a little bit of an intro about what Lacuna.ai is and what they have done. And then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about what led them to use Flyte. Obviously, they're using Flyte. What were the problems that they saw and they needed to have a solution with, and how did they and their team react, going from potentially, different approaches to an integrated platform like Flyte. But please welcome Wen Xu. And Wen Xu, maybe you want to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about what Lacuna does and what your role at Lacuna is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thanks, Martin. Thanks for having me. Really, it's a pleasure to be able to speak in front of the community. So really quick about myself, I'm a machine learning engineer at Lacuna, and we try to apply machine learning where it works well. I think there's a narrow scope where you can apply it, efficiently in the transportation space. We mainly work with transportation and digital policy. As part of, aside from being an ML engineer at Lacuna, I do a fair amount of data science engineering, and then to a certain extent, data engineering. So I also have a lot of interest in doing DevOps. I've worked on that, to a limited capacity in the past, but it's something that I've always been very interested in. Next slide, please. So what is Lacuna? Basically we are a transportation technology company working to modernize essentially public right-of-way and how that's managed. Next slide. Basically our products provide customers with digital policy tools to help them to operationalize digital infrastructure and dynamically manage streets for essentially different modes of transportation. And also we help them to manage their curb spaces. So we try to, help our customers to drive real economic, environmental, and, equitable change through transportation. I think with transportation systems becoming increasingly intelligent, we envision that digital policy will be our future.
So Wen Xu, who are your typical customers? Is it cities, obviously, and but who would you consider your typical customers?
I think we kind of sit in the middle between essentially, operators. Those are the transportation providers, and the cities. And then, could we go to the next slide? I think there's a little nice visualization there. So on one hand, we have the operators, and those are, e-bike providers. They can be taxi providers, scooter providers, your last mile, as long as your long haul, solutions, and the future, drones and robots. And then on the other hand, we work with cities. We mainly work with cities in the US, and those are city level and county level Department of Transportation. So these two parties, they have different incentives and different interests, and our goal is really to align those incentives to achieve, to basically achieve shared positive outcome.
Interesting. And so just to get maybe a use case or an example of what Lacuna has achieved, can you give us a kind of like one example about maybe one recent example that you can talk about what you have accomplished?
Yeah, sure. I think in major metropolitan areas, we have, for a couple of years now, we have, these large scooter providers, who are essentially using your curb spaces, your sidewalks, for parking their scooters. Or what end up happening is that you have, all these scooters lying around and no one being able to manage them. So we help cities to integrate, technology, sensor-based like solutions through an open standard. So very similar to Union, and essentially we we help the cities to be able to manage these providers, right? And to be able to tell them, where are they able to, park their devices, how are they able to deploy their devices, where to deploy them, and the capacity at which they should be providing service in certain areas, maybe a little bit more than other areas. Yeah, so we very much help cities to manage these private providers.
Interesting. And so it's just that we get a little bit of an idea of the scale of information and data and potentially resources. Can you tell us a little bit about it's not just like the the 2 cars or something, or a small fleet from somebody. This is really at large scale. Tell us a little bit about the scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think in major metropolitan areas, I think you're dealing with 10 to 20 providers for just one mode of transportation, right? And these providers, they're essentially fleets, so each provider can have thousands of devices, and the thousands of devices are essentially providing information. So this is very much like a big data Internet of Things type of problem. They are providing a lot of sensor information back to our service, and so there is a scale is definitely a challenge, and there are for the most part real-time information. I think that's also part of the challenge, that we had to sort of ingest these events, the sensor data at real time.
Interesting. And is it, I mean, obviously there's a huge amount of information flowing through the system, has to be aggregated and processed. Was the data challenge and that aggregation challenge and the real-time challenge, or the aggregation challenge to begin with, the problem that you saw, and then what led you to look for a solution like Flyte, or what was it that you were using before and then looking at a solution like Flyte? What triggered that search?
Yeah, so I think unlike most of the ML use cases that leverage Flyte very, very well, I think we use it mainly for general purpose data science. And like you mentioned, yeah, absolutely. I think the scale of the massive amounts of data that we need to deal with, is a huge challenge. I think the way, I kind of identified our pain points, and then sort of arrived, to centering our efforts around like a workflow platform is really sort of at the intersection of kind of many challenges. So I joined Lacuna at an early stage of kind of tackling the data problem, at the data insight and the data intelligence level. I'm part of a team that's very research oriented, that focuses on sort of the depth of the problem. But at the same time, when I joined, there was no tooling essentially to be able to access the data. So, I think one of those needs, aside from tackling the data, right, was also that we needed to get organized and basically allow us to collaborate, a lot more effectively, and avoid situations where, we're kind of, rewriting each other's code, or re-implementing, methodologies that we already know. And as part of my experience, I also, wanted to avoid having to kind of hand roll any custom solutions that addresses sort of the DevOps and infrastructure overhead. So, to be able to explore sort of this massive amounts of, IoT data, right, at scale, we essentially needed to wield our data very well, so that we can tackle the problem both at the depth as well as sort of the breadth of this problem space. And if you think about it, I think the problem that we deal with is both deep and complex. It's a huge solution space that we had to explore. So if you think about transportation, there are the different geographies which you can zoom in and zoom out, and at the microscopic and macroscopic level, they're essentially different problems. And then there's a temporal scale, you had to think about historical data versus, real-time data and the time scale that goes with that, daily, hourly, or monthly.
Yeah.
And finally, I think digital policy is a very nascent field.
Yeah.
Sorry. Excuse me. Yeah, so digital policy is a very nascent field. I think it's a big domain. I think it can be anything ranging from managing congestion to managing, your curb spaces. So, I think the solution space is really huge, right? And to be able to kind of explore that in an organized fashion, we wanted to go from applying methodology to be able to, apply those methodologies over data. And what I like to call is basically moving into higher order of experimentation to go from, just small data sets applying known methodologies to be able to experiment, at the data level. And I think it's kind of a combination of these challenges that I originally identified that kind of led me to think about, kind of centering our efforts around workflow platform.
Interesting. And as the solution space is so gigantic, what's your first impetus to of the company's first goal, just to look into research areas and identify, potentially, valuable business opportunities? Or was that already clear about what solution could be provided in that vast solution space?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit both, and really there is a lot of ambiguity around around data and around methodology and also around sort of the use cases that we want to be able to unlock. So it's certainly like a very challenging problem, and it can be, the different levels of uncertainty can be, a little bit overwhelming. And really, I mean, I think to kind of untangle that, we really want to just minimize, complexity as much as possible. I think sometimes when the use cases are a little bit more clear, I think, we can kind of think about sort of what the sort of in that specific space, right, for that use case, like what the advances have been, what's sort of the capturing knowledge through journals and things like that, and then think about, kind of applying that over data. Right. But there are use cases where, I think it very much come out of research where, hey, this is possible, right? Like this use case is possible. Does it, fulfill any business needs? So yeah, it's a little bit, there's a lot of uncertainty and, there's a lot of ambiguity and certainly I think, I think as data scientists, right, I think the earmark of like a good data scientist to be able to manage ambiguity, essentially.
I mean, you have to have an inquisitive mind to deal with that. I think that's the trademark of all of the data scientists. Now let's take a little bit of a time machine step back, and when you looked at the solution space and technologies and platforms, what was it? What were the criteria? Obviously, we know some of the criteria now, but what were kind of the solutions you were looking at, and what was the most important criteria for picking Flyte?
Yeah, I think so we were at very early stages of try to adapt, something essentially opinionated framework like Flyte. I think I mean, one of the things that I really wanted us to invest in is basically I saw the compounding value, over time of investing on a framework and investing adoption early, right? I think me as a data science engineer, I want to push for operational efficiency. I want to minimize situations where like we're tuning infrastructure, just to get something working, or, I had to provision, special permissions, or worse, right, having our, data scientists to have to deal with sort of nuances of infrastructure. I mean, I think as far as what kind of arrived, what kind of led me to Flyte and to Union to a certain extent is I did so I was aware that we want to invest in a workflow framework, and very early on I did a thorough evaluation with other popular frameworks, Luigi, Argo, I think Metaflow. um, and I was during the evaluation process, I was looking for certain things that really had to work for us, and some of those things are just a good trade-off between sort of the sophistication of the tool versus the simplicity. Well, sorry, the sophistication of the overhead of the tool versus how simple it would be to adopt it. And I think ultimately what convinced me is that I think Fly has very clean abstractions. I think it had very thorough documentation, so it was very easy to kind of just pick it up. And then finally, I think the community was very reachable, was very responsive. So with that, I was able to go from kind of nothing to like a workflow to kind of converting one of our existing methodologies that we were applying over data very easily into a workflow. And I think that the initial like POC was something that tangible that I could kind of bring forth to the team and kind of show them, that really along the way, I think that the way one of my team members has been thinking about applying this methodology can be converted into like a workflow in a pipeline fashion, like very easily, very naturally, really.
Interesting. And I think obviously the data science ahead very often is not the functional programming task, focused programming data science, much more Jupyter notebooks and so on. How was the experience with your data scientists adopting more of a workflow notion for data science and creating then reproducibility and so on and so on? Did they understand this right away, or was the hunger there? So tell us a little bit about what happened with the team.
Yeah, I think well at the very beginning, I think when we really didn't have anything, and then we had basically everything in sort of disorganized in different Jupyter notebooks. It was a difficult case to make for me, that I had to make to the team, because these things I'm talking about, operation efficiency or lower infrastructure overhead or having good abstraction, right? They are all very abstract concepts. That's for somebody who comes from academic or from pure data science domain, right? It's very hard to kind of grasp. So I very much had to play the role of kind of advocacy, trying to evangelize it. But end of the day, it's not something that's that's tangible. So I think being able to sort of start the process of converting some of our work into something tangible, into something that you can visualize, right? I think that's another advantage of Flyte that I really like, that it has like a really a clean UI. I mean, I think that's I think that's a light bulb moment that where I think the scientists really saw, I think the way we've been thinking about sort of applying this methodology in a sequential or in in a functionally dependent kind of fashion is really like a workflow with stitching like tasks into workflows.
It's a different thinking. I feel like you're exactly right. When you go into Flyte console and you see, your workflow and you understand what's happening in certain aspects, those are experiences that data scientists classically who are not in production, who are actually not building data on ML products, who are more on the research side, usually don't see that often. They go to the Jupyter notebook, but then transition this work that is really very valuable into something that actually scales the entire end-to-end path, and you can rely on, and your team can do a lot more. That gives your team, using the term, wings, so they can do a little bit more. So is that the sentiment that they still have?
Yeah, I think Jupyter notebooks, definitely I use notebooks a lot. It's definitely the place to prototype, and we continue to use that. But I think it has its kind of role and place, right? Like I think when you start having to apply to big data, or when you want to reuse methodologies and be able to like I said, like experiment over like different data sets, right? And you want to kind of do that in an efficient manner, highly parallelizable. You want to kind of get the results as soon as possible. Then I think that's when we start thinking about maybe make this process a little bit more formal, right? Like maybe like taking out some of the more used code paths and convert that into like a workflow. And part of the reason is that, and also I think the infrastructure abstraction and sort of the tightened security measures that you can have with Flyte. I think that's also very relevant to us. I think we have very sort of high security restrictions where you can only operate data, right, in a certain environment. And yeah, I think that's where have something has that already solved, already abstracted for us is very, very useful.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, in hindsight, things are always 2020. Now that you have gone through that experience, what would you tell other people on a similar situation as yours? Maybe they don't have the DevOps hat that helped you to understand really making the right decisions from a data science, machine learning point of view. But what would you tell them? How would they how should they make a decision, finding the right tools? What should they look at, and what should they focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who are thinking about Flyte or who are thinking about workflow framework in general, I think the most important thing is that just be really realistic about what they're looking for, and I would say in the short term, and then in the medium term, sort of in that priority, right? I think these workflow frameworks need to work for your needs. So you want to be really realistic about what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Another suggestion I have is to really start small, and I think don't be afraid to kind of start going through some of the tutorials, and then working through working through the tutorials and basically thinking about how that would apply. If the tool has all the capability to kind of provision you with what you need for the things that you're doing, right? Whether that's like machine learning or just data conversion, maybe. And I think it's important that the tool can abstract the nuances of underlying infrastructure. I think most of them do, but in different sort of opinionated manners, right? And I think taking out the complexity of the infrastructure and be able to access both code and data and just through like libraries or SDKs in this highly abstracted fashion. I think that's very important. And then another thing that I would encourage new adopters to do is really reach out to I think the Flyte community here. I think the community is really great, very extremely knowledgeable, very supportive, and in my experience has been very, very responsive.
Fantastic. I want to open it up to the rest of the community here, and I'm sure Kathan and the team have questions as well. So please feel free, Kathan.
I think your journey started about 6-8 months ago, right? Or if I'm not mistaken. I know it was you're very regulated environment, so getting things like can take a little bit of a challenge. But how many people are using Flyte and what's your goal for a longer term? And how do you see like just the pure scaling aspects of it in terms of organizational as your teams get added? How easy is it for them to get ramped up, and how is it for them to discover prior art, reuse it, etc.?
Yeah, great set of questions. I think I want to start with, having all new, data scientists and researchers to, sort of the ramp up experience, which surprising to me has been, very, very quick, very low barrier. I think, I don't remember concretely that I had to, kind of sit down with them and kind of walk through them with, really anything. I think they're both, yeah. I mean, my team members are great, and they were able to pick up the framework, with minimum support. I really, just looking at examples and looking at documentation. So I think that has been like a very positive experience. In terms of our size, I think we're a pretty small team. There are three of us kind of using Flyte actively. We have a fairly, I would say we have, almost a minimum cluster, 4 nodes. I think a lot of what we've done is really just centering around the abstraction of frameworks, or sorry, workflows and tasks, right? So we have, I think, well over like 20, different workflows for, a lot of the research areas, and, in the congestion domain for general data evaluation, also patterns for processing, massive amounts of data. And I think, so over time, we definitely want to invest more in building workflows and identifying areas where, we want to kind of add complexity to sort of modify the existing workflows. Yeah, so continuation adoption, and I think this is especially critical as we get into, bigger data sets where, basically Jupyter Notebooks will outlive its capability. I think for me, I think I'm excited to also to start experimenting with additional capabilities such as, Spark and, the SageMaker plugins. And finally, as machine learning engineer, I definitely want to apply it to, ML use cases, bring out some of the stuff that I have in notebooks, and start building like our core ML pipeline. I think ML ops, as many of us here know, can be very, very challenging. I think when you deal with real data, concept drift and data drifts, those are all, extremely difficult problems. Yeah, those are the things that we want to start tackling like early, essentially.
Fantastic. So Venshu, I'm checking time here. So that is super interesting. Just wondering if there's one more question within the team for you, if just looking here, if anybody has a question.
I, of course, have a question, but I will let others ask a question.
I know, Keithan, you have like a lot more. Most inquisitive mindset. If not, then I hand it to you, Keithan.
Okay. This is actually more of a general question for the community. So besides the community, purely from actually a technology point of view, one thing that we do well and we should continue improving further, like things that you think really matter to you and to your users and improve your daily lives, and how we can further improve it, or what we should, you may not have the exact solution, but that's okay. Saying that do this more or improve this. And one thing that we don't do well, we should work on and improve it. So those two things might really help us to even, decide areas to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, I think documentation has been fantastic. I think the examples really, has good coverage of most of the use cases. I think yeah, I mean, I think there are also opportunities within the documentation to kind of add, maybe a couple more examples, or add, a little level of depth. I think my personal feedback, and I kind of raised that to Yi in the past, is I think one area that maybe the project can improve is just general debuggability of, being able to kind of, go into like the Docker container or go into the pod and be able to see like, what happened. Or I think during compilation steps, when compilation fails, like, maybe add a little bit more insight into, why it failed. Yeah, things like that.
So that's fantastic feedback.
Great. Wenshu, I just want to say thank you very, very much for being our guest today. I think this is super insightful and hopefully also very inspirational for other leaders who have to make or should make a decision about finding the right platform for them to really bring the entire data science, machine learning, MLOps, process under control and not have those fragmented solutions, but really have one thing that actually works across and actually is open source as well. So really grateful for you to join us today.